for subsequent broadcasts on our YouTube channel. But don't worry, as long as you stay muted, you will not be picked up in that recording. Only those of us unmuted and speaking into the lovely yellow boxes will be recorded, which means that you should please use the chat function to ask any questions that you have throughout the evening. You can ask questions at any time, type them into the chat, and Davith and I will save them up and pose them for you at the end of the event. And then last but not least, before I hand things over, a huge thank you to all of you for your ongoing support of independent bookselling and indeed all sorts of independent businesses. It's been a rough almost year, and we're really grateful for all of you and all of the support you've given us, because we couldn't keep doing this without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And now I'm going to hand things over to Davith.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Well, it's a real pleasure to introduce Ellen Ecker Ogden to you this evening. Ellen is the author of 6 books on kitchen garden design and is a garden speaker at botanical gardens and symposia, as well as garden clubs throughout the US. She's a freelance writer and writes a blog at ellenogden.com, and she co-founded the Cook's Garden Seed Catalog, introducing cooks and gardeners to European specialty vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Her articles and kitchen garden designs have appeared in numerous national publications, including the New York Times, Martha Stewart Living, Better Homes and Gardens, and Country Gardens. Publishing today is her new book, The New Heirloom Garden, Designs, Recipes, and Heirloom Plants for Cooks Who Love to Garden. The glowing Publisher's Weekly Review said that Ogden's earthy sensibility is well conveyed in vivid color photographs. Perfect for cooks and gardeners alike, this useful look at vintage varieties puts a fresh shine on an old subject. And we are really lucky to be joined by the photographer of those vivid color photographs, Matthew Benson. He has contributed to numerous acclaimed books on gardening and food. His work is in the permanent collection of the International Center of Photography in New York. He is also a transatlantic sailor and certified alpine ski instructor. Please welcome to Northshire Live, Matthew Benson and Ellen Ecker Ogden.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm not sure who you see, if you see both of us at the same time or all of us, but welcome everybody. And of course, I want to thank the Northshire for hosting this event. And I can't see any of you, but I know a lot of my friends are here. And thank you for coming tonight on this snowy evening. Since this is my 5th book, actually, but this is my first virtual book tour. And so you're not able to see the book and hold it and hug it like I do. So I'm going to take you on a virtual journey of what's inside this book. You see it's got a wonderful cover. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the book got started, what inspired the idea, and then introduce Matthew. And Matthew's going to tell you a little bit about how he got involved and what he does. And then we're going to take you sort of step by step through a few of the chapters, some of the recipes, and of course, the beautiful food. So without further ado, I'm actually going to do a screen share because I thought that would be the best way to share with you some of the images from the book. So I hope you've had dinner or have something to eat, because you're going to see some gorgeous food shots. So without further ado, I am going to screen share. Is that right, Rachel? And everybody good? Okay, here we go. Share, here we go. All right. So this is the beautiful cover of the New Heirloom Garden, and their designs and recipes and heirloom plants. So there's really 3 different chapters in the book. But since my name is on the cover, you think maybe I'm responsible for this book, but honestly, I have a lot of people to thank. We have my editor, the editorial assistant, my agent, all the design people, all the art people. You know, writing a book is like doing a movie. There's so many people who deserve credit. And I feel a little humbled that my name is on the front, because I couldn't have done it with everybody else. So I just want to acknowledge everybody who participated in this book. So thank you, everybody. So the idea for this book really started in April 2016, which when I was going back through my photos, it really amazed me. But it was April, and this is what my garden looked like. And I received a phone call from an editor at Garden Design magazine. And Garden Design magazine is no longer, but at the time it was my favorite magazine. I read it the moment it came in from front to back. And when they called me and asked me to do 3 heirloom garden designs, my heart was racing. I said, of course, of course. But I didn't really know what an heirloom garden design meant. I had just finished doing a book with Matthew. We had just finished doing the Vermont Country Store cookbook, and there was a lot of history and a lot of heirloom recipes. And so the word heirloom was at least part of my vocabulary, but I didn't really know what an heirloom garden was. So I called a couple of friends who I knew were seed savers. One was Amy Goldman, who was the president of the board of Seed Savers Exchange. And I said, Amy, can you just tell me what is an heirloom seed? And she said, well, heirloom seeds are the same as open pollinated seeds. It means you can grow the seeds from year to year when you save them. And they're typically something that goes back about 50 years, because that's when hybrids started to be introduced into the seed markets. And so a lot of seeds that we buy in catalogs can be heirloom, can be open pollinated, can be hybrid. There's a lot of information to know about seeds. And I was immediately excited to learn more about seeds. And so I managed to call some other people and do some research and learn about heirlooms and heirloom seeds. And the article came out in 2018 in Garden Design magazine. And I was still pretty excited at that point about heirloom seeds. In fact, I'd become a seed saver at that point. I really thought that there was a lot to learn about heirlooms. And so I wrote a book proposal, and it was accepted. And then I needed to write this book. So I'm telling you all this because writing a garden design book is very different than writing a novel. If I were writing a novel, I'd probably plot it out. I'd know what the beginning and the middle and the end would be, and probably the story in between. But when I started writing this book, all I really started with was an intense curiosity to learn more about heirloom seeds and heirloom gardens and garden designs. And so the book kind of evolved organically as I began to really dig deeper into what, the history of seeds and the history of seed catalogs. And from the back cover, I can tell you an heirloom garden is an opportunity to plant a piece of history that provides a deeper connection to the food you eat, the people you love, and the landscape that surrounds your home. But that really didn't come to me till the end. I still was curious. And so I started looking at seed catalogs, a lot of seed catalogs, and all of you who are on this talk tonight probably have a stack of seed catalogs, and maybe you've already ordered your seeds. And for me, it really started by going back to the early seed catalogs, which was, of course, Burpee. They were one of the first. Landreth went back into the 1780s. So there were a lot of old seed catalogs, and looking at what kinds of things were in these old catalogs, and realizing that crops like rutabagas and turnips were, people grew a lot of different kinds of rutabagas back then. And I don't even think I could tell you the difference between a rutabaga and a turnip. And hundreds of different kinds of sweet peas and fragrant flowers during the Victorian times. And there were just so many different vegetables and flowers and fruits that were grown and offered in seed catalogs or offered to gardeners, but many of them weren't really appearing in the seed catalogs on a regular basis. And so that's when I really started to become a seed saver, because I realized things like this beautiful chocolate runner bean starts off as a bean, and I could eat it as a bean. But if I allowed a few of the plants to grow, I would get these gorgeous pink seeds that I could save to grow in next year's garden. And I could also give them away to friends. So seed saving became a real passion for me, and really developed in the course of writing this book. And so I'm going to be sharing with you the 3 chapters in the book: the step-by-step, the heirloom garden designs, and the plant families, because as a seed saver, one of the things that I learned was that in order to be a seed saver, you really have to understand how a plant grows. You need to know if it's an annual or a biennial, and whether it's going to set seed the first year or the second year, and then what type of seed, if it's lettuce, how long it's going to take, or if it's flowers, you know, and especially things like squash, when you plant them next to each other, they're going to be open pollinated, so they're going to start cross-pollinating. So there was a little bit to learn. Enter Matthew Benson. When I got the contract to write this book, I said, I really want to work with Matthew because I know Matthew is a fantastic photographer. He lives on a farm, he grows food. He's written his own book called Grow Beautiful Food. And so I knew that if I was going to create this book, that I wanted him as part of the team. So Matthew lives in the Hudson Valley. He lives on the gorgeous old farm, and he's going to tell you a little bit about his farm. And Matthew, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Sure. Well, first of all, Ellen, thank you for bringing me into this project with you. I love working with you, and I feel a real companionship intellectually and visually. And I think the narrative of the book, as it turned out, really feels like a collaboration with you. So that's testament alone to our ability to really have a similar vision. So yeah, so my farm, Stonegate Farm, interestingly, we grow a lot of heirloom vegetables, and we grow a lot of heirloom botanicals and herbs, and we're all organic. But one of the key things that we do on the farm that's very heirloom is we cultivate historic fruit. So we grow all kinds of antique apples and pears that were from the period when my property was built in the 1850s. So all kinds of beautiful, beautiful rare fruit like the Sopus Spitzenberg and Ashmid's Kernel and Celestia and Pink Sparkle. And because I wanted my farm and what I grow to have some continuity and some narrative to it that was beyond just the food, that had history attached to it. So heirlooms are all about that. You're creating a dialogue with history, and you're becoming a more sort of sentient grower, a more dynamic grower, because you're growing for reasons other than just, as we know, heirlooms are some of the most beautiful seeds you can buy, and some of the most beautiful, like in this shot here, there's heirlooms in the upper left, Tromba da Benya, Costata Romanesco from Franchi Seed Company, Jimmy Nardello pepper, Shiro plum. So this book really excited me because it's everything I care about as a grower, and certainly everything I care about as someone who's interested in history and preserving history. Anything to add to that, Ellen? Oh, not this shot.
So I wanted to show you Matthew in action. So once we agreed on the book, and once I had a better idea of, actually, I think I'd already turned the manuscript in this point, and we started the photography. When was it? 2 years ago, 2019, I think. We needed to figure out how to do it. And so we actually shot the photographs in 2 locations. And in this picture, we're at Philo Ridge Farm up in Charlotte, Vermont, where we were lucky to have a farmhouse that was situated right on the property where there were, how many acres? 10 acres of gorgeous organic vegetables that were being grown right there. So we would go out and harvest in the morning, and then Matthew would start setting up the photos. And one of the things that I most appreciate about Matthew's work is that he uses natural light. And so in this farmhouse, he was always watching the light in the window. He knew when it would be coming in at 9 o'clock and at 2 o'clock and at 4 o'clock, and how the shadows were working. And the first few shots we did, I just couldn't believe how beautiful they were. We have here, I don't even know what all of these different squashes are, but in the chapter of digging deeper and where the recipes are, we wanted to have plant families represented. And in this chapter where the recipes are, so this is a pumpkin apple bisque soup that was shot on a wonderful antique background. Matthew, do you want to talk about what you brought as props for these shots?
Yeah, so I have a barn full of props that I've collected from doing a lot of cookbooks. I brought a lot of that up to Philo Ridge in Vermont to work with Ellen on the plant family shots. And this was actually shot at my farm in my barn. And these are some of the surfaces I use. You know, as a photographer, I'm always interested in the story. And obviously, if it's a book about heirlooms, I want everything to have a kind of sense of having been in the world for a while. So you choose props very carefully. The patina of this sort of sea green table, you know, the rusticity of the burlap or linen napkin. You know, you're not just trying to take a pretty picture whenever you're shooting a cookbook. You're trying to tell a story about that food and what the idea behind the recipe is, and what the story is. As a photographer, you're really a storyteller first, you know. Now, never mind the socks and sandals in this shot. But we weren't supposed to be wearing shoes in the house, so there you have it. But this is using some antique materials from my collection that really help in this case, the legume family sort of pop off the surface nicely. These patinated dark grays and this fluted tray really made this shot come alive. And then you spend a lot of time, of course, making it look, you design it first and then you undesign it. You pull it apart so that it feels real and alive and dynamic, so it doesn't look too stiff and staged. So this was one of my favorite shots from the book. I think it just has a nice rhythm and flow to it. And I think, you know, you're also dealing with a plant family that has some exquisite tones to it, those rattlesnake pole beans and you know, just the form and shape of this plant family is really beautiful. So that always helps.
I love this shot too. I can't decide between the squash or this shot, but I also love, we have soybeans in here and you don't often see are these soy? Yeah, these are soybeans. I think.
Yeah.
The foliage is so beautiful. I love the way Matthew's brought in the foliage as well as the beans and opened them up to make it look very natural.
Well, that's the story there, Ellen, because the beans climb on these long tendrils. So that's part of their narrative as a bean, you know, like that makes sense to include that.
Yeah, it's lovely. And the amaranth family, which includes beets and chard, and pairing it with recipes was really fun. We did a lot of the recipes at Stonegate Farm. A couple weeks after we did the shots at Philo Ridge Farm, we met in Hudson Valley with Nora and her assistant who did the food styling for the Country Store Cookbook and this book. And they just did such a beautiful job. The carrot family. I mean, we were so lucky to find carrots pulled fresh from the garden, and the celeriac and the dill and everything that was in that family.
Well, when you can harvest your own props, that's always a plus. I mean, when I shoot food in my barn at Stonegate, I often go out and harvest for the plate. So it's a nice way to grow your own props.
Right. And so these are recipes from the book. There's designs and recipes for cooks who love to garden, I like to say. And one of the things I learned about from Nora when she was styling this carrot is you can actually take the carrot tops and crisp them up, drop them in a little hot oil, and they make a nice, wonderful, crispy garnish to put on the top of a carrot dish, something I'd never tried before. The mint family. Which are most of the herbs, including basil and this spiral basil pesto swirl bread that is also one of my favorite recipes. And the rose family. Remember doing this? This was the last day that we did this shot, I remember. And it was a little hard to find some of these fruits, but somehow you managed to just put together this extraordinary collection. Again, notice we're using the same tray and things to give it the heirloom look, and then the recipe for the berry muffins that we took with this, not the same fruit, of course, but for that family. And chocolate mint granita. These are just some recipes from the book. This is a farro and barlotto bean salad. Very simple. There's a husk ground cherry clafouti. We were reminiscing when Matthew and I were looking at these photos last night. We were saying that we loved this recipe, that we had it for breakfast and lunch, didn't we? I mean, we couldn't get enough of it. And then we kind of fought over the last piece. It was so good. But if you haven't grown ground cherries, they're like a tomatillo. They're called golden tomatillo. They're tiny little cherry tomatoes, very, very sweet. One plant produces about 100, and they form in these wonderful little paper husks, as you can see. So it's a little bit of an effort to make this, but it's definitely worth it.
Well, and then they ripen when, they're ripe when they've fallen on the ground beneath the plant.
Yeah.
And they're about as slow as tomatoes, so maybe 75, 80 days before you get your first ground cherries, but then they're falling. You come out in the morning, they're all on the ground around the plants. They're delicious. They taste like pineapple a little bit.
So really what Matthew and I wanted to do with this book, and I think we did a really good job. I must say, I think it's the prettiest book. I love all of my books, but I think this one is the most beautiful because we want to set a mood. I mean, as both of us are gardeners and both of us are cooks, and it's really an invitation to encourage our audience like you to grow a beautiful food garden, to go beyond just an ordinary raised bed to something that really has height and drama and fragrance and personality in the garden. But of course, there's certain ways to go about it. You have to do some soil prep and design. And so in the book, there's lots of suggestions for what to put in the garden and how to set it up so that it has a wonderful ambiance. And because I really was still learning about seed saving, I feel like I've come a long way, but as a gardener, I've been gardening now for 30 years and I still feel I have so much to learn. I wanted to include interviews with other seed savers, such as Frank Morton, who owns a seed catalog called Wild Garden Seed, and William Royce Reaver, who has written a lot about heirloom vegetables. And Matthew, would you tell us a little bit about the fruit in this photograph?
Yeah, so this is from my book, Growing Beautiful Food, and there's a section in there on historic orcharding. And actually, the book that's opened there with that old paring knife is a copy of Andrew Jackson Downing's 1852 volume of Fruit and Fruit Trees of America. And I'm a big Downing fan. I live right next door to Newburgh, New York, where Downing had his nursery. He's actually buried about a mile from my house. And Downing was the head of the American Horticultural Society in the mid-19th century. He died tragically at age 37 on the Hudson River in a steamboat fire. But in that time, he had more influence and impact on horticulture, landscape design, and architecture than probably any American. And there's an amphora memorial to him on the Smithsonian Mall. So he was quite a big deal. But anyway, so I wanted to plant a Downing orchard, an heirloom orchard, as I mentioned earlier. And what I did was I scoured the internet, the young internet then, and I found a nurseryman in Baroda, Michigan, whose job for the Park Service was to maintain Civil War battlefield orchards. So he had historic fruit from a perfect time period for me, the 1860s. And he had all these graftings of these historic fruits with these fantastic histories and names. So this is a copy of Downing's book, open, and a lithograph of Downing. And this apple looks like either Esopus Spitzenberg or maybe it's not Svar. Esopus Spitzenberg or Ashmit's kernel, sort of a small mottled red blushed apple. The thing about eating heirlooms of any kind, and whether they be fruit or vegetable, is that the flavor, by and large, is beyond anything you could get in the market. It's just beyond, and it's hard to explain. And I used to say to my CSA members on my farm, when I had quite a group that came and every weekend joined a CSA seasonally on my farm, my fruit was always imperfect. And because I'm all organic, and I would start quoting about wabi-sabi to them. So wabi-sabi is the Japanese philosophy of imperfection. And I'd say, I'm giving you this beautiful wabi-sabi apple with all of its gorgeous imperfection, and it'll taste like nothing you've ever eaten.
Right.
So
and
that's that story.
Well, I love the story, Matthew, but I also love this introduction to heirloom apples. And I have an old apple tree in my backyard too, which is not the best eating apple, but it's really good for pies. And, you know, back at the turn of the century, there were what, 15,000 different kinds of apples. And now there's less than 900 or something. I mean, so another reason for growing heirlooms is to be able to preserve the diversity and, you know, the species of all these wonderful things that are at risk of being lost and forgotten.
Right.
So I want to do a call out to my friend and neighbor, Terry Findyson, as I start to show you some of my designs. And I know she's on the call. I didn't make her a co-host, but I was really lucky that she offered to do the designs for this book. And I'm just going to show you 3 examples of them, but we kept them very simple. The designs are really meant as a suggestion for ways that you can plant your own garden. In all of my books, I try and make it easy for you to be able to plant the seed or design your garden and then put your own spin on it. So we have the Arc of Taste garden, which is based on old varieties from the slow food that are endangered varieties like the Hopi red dye and the Hitsatsu red shelling bean and some things that you may have trouble finding. So you can substitute them with different things, but I just give you an idea of where to place them in the garden. Of course, everybody grows arugula and basil and beet greens, and this was a way to take the classic parterre 4-square design and divide it up so that you can grow a lot more in a small space. So I really want to just wrap it up here. I don't, we can get into questions and answers, but I would love to encourage you to plant heirlooms and grow something new that is old, such as this wonderful Egyptian walking onion, which is from my own garden, and save heirloom seeds. Sow, grow, save, and share your seeds and give them to others. And to remember to taste heirlooms. That I consider heirlooms to have the best flavor. I think flavor is one of those things that's hard to define, but I think once you pop an heirloom tomato in your mouth or one of these wonderful Concord grapes or that Italian zucchini, you will be forever changed. So just to leave you with a quote from Guy Clark, the country music singer, who maybe Matthew will sing. The song, there are only 2 things in life that money can't buy: true love and homegrown heirloom tomatoes. So I want to say thank you very much. We're going to stop screen sharing. The book is at the Northshire. Today was the first day that it was allowed, the booksellers were allowed to put it on their shelves, and I'll be going down there tomorrow to do some book signing. So I would love for you to try the book.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was fantastic. We've already got some questions in the chat. And this first one is from Bad Girl. She says, she's asked, are heirlooms more susceptible to disease than hybrid varieties?
Well, the seed catalogs would make you feel that way. I haven't really talked about seed catalogs and disease resistance and all that. I think that it depends on what variety it is. A lot of the hybrids have been developed, especially tomatoes, they've been developed for disease resistance. I haven't had any difficulty growing any of the heirlooms that I grow in my book and that I grow in my garden. So I would say no, but what do you think, Matthew?
I tell you, my theory on this is that I grow, I'm organic, so I'm not using a lot of chemicals at all, but I really grow preventatively. In other words, I feel that a plant that is just like a human being, that is well fed and nurtured and given the kind of soil it needs and micronutrients it needs and everything else, that plant is going to be more resistant. In other words, I'm not treating symptoms like, oh, there's some black spot or oh, there's some aphids or whatever. I'm trying to create a healthy plant that can resist not all, but a lot. I want to get a plant that has vigor. So one of the things I do to make my plants more vigorous so they in turn are more resistant to disease is, for example, I glaze a lot of my plants with seaweed and fish emulsion. You know, I put rock dust in the soil so they're full of micronutrients, boron and calcium and manganese. So it's just like a healthy person, you know, you start with a good seed and you put it in great soil and you nurture it, you care for it, and that person is going to be more resistant to illness. Excuse me, that seed is going to be more resistant to illness, that person as well. But it's the same philosophy, you know. And the thing about this moment, I was talking to Ellen about this last night, because of where we are with this pandemic and because of who we are as growers and because of having to realize how fragile our food system is and how we need to insource the autonomy over how we eat and our own health, it's so critical that we start really becoming more sentient and sensitive growers. And, you know, the thing about saving seed is it's the next level of being a grower and a gardener, because you are becoming a historian and an archivist of a genome, and you're passing it along. And just remember, let's say you have an heirloom tomato that does really well on your property one season, right? You harvest that heirloom seeds, you plant them again the next season, it does really well. It keeps adapting to your garden so that it can thrive. It wants to do as well as it can. So it's kind of like this adaptive regeneration with an heirloom seed. You plant a hybrid, obviously you can't save the seeds, but an heirloom, you save the seeds and then they become more, you know, adaptive, I guess in a Darwinian way, to your aspect of light, your soil, your mineral content, everything else. And anytime someone comes and works here with me, we hire people every season to work here and learn here. I always tell them to think like a plant. You know, if I were a plant, what would I want? I don't want to be sprayed with medication. I don't want to be sprayed with all kinds of insanity. I just want to be loved from the moment I'm dropped into a 72 cell flat, you know? And that's really, well, that's the long version of my philosophy, Ellen. Yes.
Well, I completely agree with you. And I do think it's interesting that I'm a home grower with a fairly small kitchen garden and you are a productive grower, but we absolutely have the same philosophy that if you take care of the plant and the seed, it's about appreciation. And I think that that's the other key piece of growing an heirloom garden is that you're appreciating it. You're taking it from seed, growing it all the way to seed, and then you're taking that same seed again each year and continuing to grow. So anyways, we have other questions, I'm sure, but thank you.
And actually this segues perfectly into Barbara's question, because she asked, what's the best way to store seeds through the winter? And she mentions, as particularly as we all wait patiently for our spring to arrive.
Right. I store mine in mason jars, well marked. I dry them, make sure that they're completely dry. And I try not to store them in paper envelopes because there's too much moisture that can get into paper envelopes. So I have big trays of mason jars that I take in and out. What do you do, Matthew?
I do that as well. Mason jars are great. We dry them out. We have a dehydrator we put on very low to make sure. I always try to harvest seeds once the plants have started to falter and the seeds are just waiting to drop into the ground. That's a part of it too. But the other thing is, I've done a number of books with Barbara Damrosch up in Maine, who's a garden writer, and she always would say to me when I was first becoming a grower with more intent, she would say, you know, that little speck wants to grow. That tiny little chamomile dust mite, you know, wants to grow, and everything's there, and you just have to give them, you know, soil, light, and water, and a certain amount of warmth, and they will do their thing. So it's, you know, it's always amazing after, as Ellen said, you start with a seed and you end up with this plant. I mean, just this transition is so humbling to take this little genomic speck and then, you know, up 2 months later, you're standing beneath a 10-foot tomato vine. It's pretty remarkable and empowering to be a part of that process. So
yeah,
I think we need grounding now, not to get away from some of this, but I think we, as growers and gardeners, and when I lecture about this, I really feel people who are not growers are looking for some way to be in the world with a lighter footprint, with a more thoughtful footprint, and to do something meaningful and have purposeful work in their life. I mean, look, I have a small farm, but it's a lot of work, and I don't really do it for money. I do it because I want to be engaged and in relationship with nature, and that's enough for me. That's enough reward for me.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
All right, thank you both. This one question's for you, Ellen. Annie Philbrick asks, what, if any, is your connection with Renee Shepard from A Cook's Garden?
Nothing. She's a friend. We have no connection because the Cook's Garden and Renee's seeds are East Coast, West Coast, different things.
Thanks. There's a question here from Constance Beatty too. She says, I inherited the remains of an orchard and suspect some of the trees are very old indeed. How can I find out what varieties they are?
What was the last part of that? I'm sorry.
How can she find out the varieties of these older orchard trees?
Oh, Kim.
I have an idea.
You do?
Yeah. I haven't had to do this, but I do know that Cornell has a very extensive fruit, I don't know what they call it, library, genome library of fruit. And they're very, very deeply engaged in the preservation of historic fruit, in breeding fruit, in propagating fruit. So I imagine you could contact Cornell and you could probably just send a few apples up to them. I would start with that. And they would do some sorts of testing that they do up there. But Cornell's a great resource for gardeners and growers.
I was going to say, Kim, there's also some wonderful books on old. There's a couple of apple experts right in our New England area, in New Hampshire and in Massachusetts. And but it's hard to identify some of those old things, but some of them are very, I mean, let's take a look. Try it, taste them.
Yeah, I mean, apples also are not true to their seed. So when Johnny Appleseed was going around the country, mostly he was giving people seed so they could grow just these strange crossbred apples to make hard cider. Hard cider was a big deal. And actually Johnny Appleseed was kind of like, building saloons everywhere for people because they just wanted to grow apples for hard cider. Yeah, so, you're not going to be able to, if you have an old orchard, some of the varieties might not be an actual known variety because they're not in cultivation and they might've been a cross between two apples and you've got the only one like it.
I got to say, they taste absolutely astounding. They have a taste that's beyond almost any apple I've ever tasted. So I'm dying to know what they are.
Well,
Yeah, so it's probably some heirloom that's been around that hasn't lost its flavor due to, over hybridizing and possibly over, making it more resistant to different things. And, I love a good wonky apple that's misshapen and mottled. I love a wonky pear. For me, it's just like there's all this inner beauty that's the flavor. And actually the exterior beauty, that's the thing about wabi-sabi in Japan. The Japanese have a different philosophy about aging. They love the older face. They revere the patina. The tea ceremony, the cracked and crazed pot in the tea ceremony is worshipped, as is the sort of, they have their very perfectly packaged fruit too, but then really they love things that have been in the world. They have a kind of philosophical reverence for that. So we should be more like that. We're a little bit too much of a Botoxy culture. We should appreciate our lines and wrinkles and our wonky fruit, I think.
All right, enough, Matthew. But Kim, you're very lucky. So that's great that you value them and that you appreciate them, because that's really what the heart of an heirloom garden is about, is to be able to say, these apples have fantastic flavor. I love hearing that.
Well, Ellen, you come up and taste some, okay?
I'm just so excited to. I know, I can't wait. It sounds good.
They're
But
amazing.
don't forget some of those old varieties like the quince. Very few people have quince, but are they ever the most beautiful flowers and incredible flavors? And so, in Vermont, we can't grow a lot of different kinds of fruit, but we certainly can explore some of the old-fashioned varieties.
Yeah, I highly
Thank you.
recommend growing quince. Quince is great, and grow it on dwarfing rootstock. And it has basically tulip-like flowers in the spring, pale pink tulips on the branches. And then you harvest them in October, and they have, does anyone know what bledding is? The English are very into bledding with their medlars and stuff. So you let the fruit almost rot on the tree. and all the perfume and aromatics like just becomes really intense. And that's when you harvest it after that. So quints are great for that kind of growing.
Anyways, I want to say thank you for everybody for being here. We're trying to keep it under 45 minutes. I think we've managed to do it 40 minutes, and they have copies of the book at the store. And I hope you'll all try growing something new. I always say it's good to grow in a garden 80-20, 80% tried and true, 20% something new and different. So maybe this year will be the year that you start growing some heirlooms that you've never even heard of before, and they may become favorites.
Wonderful. And can I just say one more thing? If you'd like to know more about heirloom growing in orchards, you can go to Stonegate Farm. So Stonegate Farm has a Instagram account at Stonegate Farm, New York. You can just look up Stonegate Farm. We're obviously out there in the world, and you can sort of see what we do and get turned on to sort of more heirloom ideas as well.
Ellen, Matthew, thank you both so much. This has been a really delightful evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome, David. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful night.
The
Bye-bye.
new Heirloom Garden. You can get it at northshire.com. We've got the link in there or in person. Thanks so much, y'all.
All right, everyone.
Bye.